Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to Tap Theory. Today I want to talk to you about positions and positional playing. So when I'm saying positions and positional playing, I'm not talking about all the cool poses you can strike while you're playing, and I'm not even talking about like where your hands are on the frets. I'm talking about which side of the Chapman stick both or either one of your hands are playing. So in my studies I've come across three major positions: crossed, half-crossed, and uncrossed, and I'm going to give a brief pros and cons and demonstration in each. So let's get started with crossed playing. This is the traditional version of Chapman stick playing, where your hands reach across to either side, with your left hand coming over to the bass side and your right hand coming over to the treble side and skipping the strings that are closest to them. If you play the stick and have been playing for longer than like a month, you've been playing crossed, for sure. So some of the pros is that your hands are nice and wide open. I consider this probably the most dexterous position in that I can play at top speed with both hands this way. I can cover a lot of ground. It leads itself to a more linear approach with the right hand and a more chordal approach with the left hand. And you can hear this style of playing with just about every player out there. You know, a good example of this from my own music is off of Journey to the Center of the Ear, the middle part of a song called Jerisa. And I break it down, I do the classic like arpeggiated left hand with you know, right hand melody. You can see the obvious advantages of this. You know, I'm able to accompany myself while playing a melody. Stuff like I Shot the Sheriff groove. I can do really complex groovy things like that. You know, it's the classic approach to the Chapman stick. One of the big cons though is that you wind up colliding with your hands sometimes if you're not careful with where you decide to place your notes. Another con is that it's a little bit more difficult if you've got the fifths tuning to navigate the bass side in a more linear, kind of scalar normal fashion. Like that. You'll notice just to do that, I played it in half-crossed. Next up we have half-crossed, and this is basically when you use both hands on a single side of the Chapman stick. This is a technique I use a lot in Geff because in Geff you're not playing all of the notes all the time, right? Tyler and I divvy up our parts to cover specific roles that the arrangement requires. So a lot of times, you know, it's correct for me to like play a guitar line on the bass side and leave the treble side out of it for a part, and then later come to an uncrossed riff or a crossed riff or something like that to fill in that part. So some of the pros are that you can really dedicate a lot of focus to a single part, which can be pretty cool depending on the kind of part that you're playing. And you can get a much more linear sound on the bass side and a much more intervallic sound on the treble side. You can hear an example of this in Whole Body Headbang with the first time that the big riff comes in. And you can hear that the smoothness that is afforded that line, that if I had to play that just one-handed, and I do play that one-handed in uncrossed later in the song, it just phrases differently. You know, playing it uncrossed, it sounds a little bit, I guess, slipperier, slidier. reason that I switch to uncrossed the second time that it comes in is because I want to play some chords over the top. Like that. But honestly, it's just like a way simpler riff with half-crossed, and why make it hard for yourself, one. And two, the tone of the strings is a little bit different. It actually sounds more aggressive, in my opinion, in half-crossed than uncrossed. You can also get some like really interesting guitar effects or piano effects on the treble side of the stick. If you go back to Geff's first album, there's a little micro song called Yocto, and I'm just kind of holding this sustain chord thing throughout the whole thing while our drummer Josh basically improvises around the groove. Again, I want you to notice the phrasing. Half-crossed allows me a certain amount of sustain by holding my left hand down on the notes that I wouldn't be able to get with my just my right hand. It also allows me to get very interesting slides and you know, different phrasings throughout these chords that I wouldn't be able to get with just my right hand. Some of the cons of half-crossed are, you know, the fact that it becomes much more difficult to play more than a single part at once. You know, there is a moment in the Geff album where I do kind of a 3/4 crossed or a half cross mixed with thumb technique, like that. But it's not dexterous. All I can do is just chord slaps. You know, I can't articulate anything like that. I think sometimes it can also be a little bit more difficult to see what you're trying to play in half crossed because now you're working with multiple locations on one side, right? You really got to know that form 4 down here, or form 1 down here, the minor pentatonic scale, connects to form 5 up here to really get, you know, the most out of that. Stuff like that. You see a lot of half-crossed from guys like Nick Beggs and Tony Levin. They're primarily playing the stick as a bass plus in, you know, the groups that they play it in, except for Stickmen. Tony Levin breaks out of that role in Stickmen because that's a totally different thing. But with Peter Gabriel and King Crimson and groups like that, he was primarily just, you know, just the bass with it. And so he did a lot of half-cross stuff, and so does Nick Beggs, and that's I think a really good introduction to playing half-crossed on the stick, is learning some King Crimson tunes or some Kajagoogoo or maybe some Steven Wilson tunes. And finally, that brings us to uncrossed. Uncrossed is a really cool thing where you play the strings nearest to your hands, right? So rather than crossed all the way across or half-crossed both on one side, you're playing uncrossed. And you know, some of the pros of this is that it's much easier to mix ranges. You can do really interesting interspersed chords between the two sides, or tightly harmonized lines and stuff like that. Geff uses this in our song Macroaggressions. There's a part where I play this like pretty arpeggiated chord thing that you can find in the exercises. It goes like this. You'll notice that, you know, the ranges of these notes are right within each other. This is not something that you could do easily on a guitar, or, you know, this is really combining like classical guitar sound with piano technique and the ability to play notes that are completely adjacent to each other on the piano. You know, like listen, he's got this low D, then A, D, and then this E here. and then this F sharp here. I'm playing that. But I'm playing that in a way that allows me to sustain through, and you get the nice thick tension of playing all those notes together. You'll also notice that in my arrangement of Afro Blue by Mongo Santa Maria, I take the bridge section, which is this cool line, and I do some crazy harmonies with it. Really tight, close harmonies, because I wind up going uncrossed. To do that all, on one side, or, in half crossed or something, it would look like this. I can't even do it. I don't have enough strings. And doing it uncrossed, or crossed rather, my hands run into each other. So I do it uncrossed and bam, it's right there. One of the cons of uncrossed is it is, in my opinion, the least dexterous position. The angle that I have to have my wrist at to nail all these notes makes it very difficult for my ring finger and my pinky to be accurate. Some of the targeting methods that I would use for uncrossed and crossed, or sorry, half crossed and crossed, are not quite as applicable. And so I'll have to kind of really make sure that I've practiced where I'm aiming and practice my transitions from one place on the neck to the next. But otherwise, it's really, like I said, it's really good for like tight harmonies or really thick, full chords and doing these kind of arpeggiated chordal things like that. There's another spot in the Geff album in a song called Morningstar where I do it uncrossed, and I actually switch between crossed and uncrossed in this to achieve different things range-wise. And I think it demonstrates the difference between the two and the blending of the two really well. So if you take a look at that, that actually illustrates all three positions, even if the half crossed is just very brief. First we start out in uncrossed to make these big thick chords, and we arpeggiate them out. And then there's this run in half crossed, right, where I have to bring my finger back to get it ready. Right, and it's a little bit easier to do that than, I had originally written it to do this. That's hard. And there's nothing else going on the other side, so why? Why make it harder? And then once we land here, we go fully crossed. And then back to uncrossed. So in the exercises for this video, I've got a ton of different examples of playing. Some of them are from Geff, some of them are for other arrangements that I've made, and some of them are from my solo album, stuff like that. But I think that each example is a good showing of, kind of what I like to use these positions for. And as I showed in the very last example that I gave, which I did not include because the time signatures of that are very difficult, and I don't think it would be particularly accessible to a lot of people. It's never about one position or the other. It's about the smoothness with which you can flow. You know, you learn all these positions, and then you bring it back, and you forget them all so that you can just flow smoothly between them. You know, from uncrossed to crossed to half crossed to back to half crossed and then uncrossed and all that kind of stuff. And that's your line, right? That's your part that you're playing as it passes through that. And then, you know, there's other stuff like I had mentioned earlier in the video where you can do like a 3/4 crossed kind of thing, where, you know, you're playing half cross and you use thumb technique, or you know, particularly with the left hand, you're playing, you know, your first finger on a bass note and your second and third finger on treble side notes, or maybe you're bringing your left hand thumb over, like there's this Japanese guy Satoru who is amazing at that, and his left hand thumb technique just blows my mind sometimes. But even those are extensions of half crossed and uncrossed positions, stuff like that. So with that, take this, try out the examples, come up with some stuff on your own. Hopefully this expanded the way that you looked at the stick a little bit. And yeah, good stuff. Keep exploring.